In a world of chaotic noise, the podcast Keep Walking With Me searches for potential solutions towards the best version of ourselves. One likes to make questions, the other loves to find answers. Nuno and João are partners from the Walking Mentorship, and they bring the inside look in the life of the people they walk with.
Hi Dan, welcome to Keep Walking With Me, our podcast from Walking Mentorship.
It's wonderful to be here. Thanks for having me.
No, it's our pleasure. Let me first of all ask you to tell us who is Dan Rubin in a nutshell.
I would say that I'm a writer, I'm an editor, I'm a walker, and I'm a paddler. And my interests all merge and fuse and weave together. And the working with words and walking and experiencing the water is how I choose to live in the world and navigate and understand the world and share stories that I think and hope will resonate with other people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, we actually got to know you through your book Born to Walk, which is quite a statement on walking.
Yeah, I guess when I started to find my voice in this area, it all revolved around walking. And to me, walking is not only a powerful and often neglected way of engaging with the world, but it's a wonderful metaphor for the sense of progress and possibility that we have to make small repairs, to fix things, to reconnect with natural and human ecosystems. And that all kind of gelled together and came together in that book.
Yeah. Well, that's really an inspiring thought. Can you tell us if you remember, or if it's a clear thought in your mind, when did walking become important to you, or when did you realize it was important in your life, and why?
Very good question. I mean, I think like so many people, walking was always a part of my life. My family was quite active, and from a young age, my parents took my two brothers and I walking not only in beautiful natural places, but in Toronto, in the city in which I was born and raised. And we saw walking. I saw walking from childhood onward as not only a type of transportation, but a form of recreation, as a way to slow down, as a way to talk to one another, as a way to, the slow living movement wasn't, sort of termed a movement at that point. But my parents, who sort of came of age in the 60s, saw that rejecting some of the artifices of modern society would instill important values in their children, and that certainly stuck. So walking was always there, but as I became a journalist, as I became a writer, as I became an editor, as I searched for and discovered my literary voice, that's when walking really took over. And as I myself was concerned about and criticizing and rejecting some of the outcrops of contemporary capitalism, of modern technology, I saw walking in a sense as a form of resistance, as a way to reject and suggest or provide alternatives to some of the destructive ways in which we engage with the planet and other people. And that book, Born to Walk, that's kind of the ethos that I attempted to tap into. And as a journalist who not only shares his own voice, but mines the voices and stories of others, I searched for and found people whose lives, whose work, whose world revolved around one positive aspect, one holistic health aspect of walking, whether it was a form of physical health or mental health or economic health, spiritual, social, etc. So that book is really an attempt to look at people who see the world through the lens of walking and to bring together their stories so the cumulative whole shows how powerful or how transformative the act of walking can be.
Dan, thank you so much. Is there any walk that shaped your life? And I'm sure there is one there, or more than one. Can you tell us a little bit, you know, a little bit more about that walk? Maybe one that you can pick up that really, really helped you to shape your life.
Yeah, well, I mean, it happened about 6 or 7 years ago. I should remember when, and it's kind of a narrative spine of my book, and the central character was a walk I joined led by an Indigenous surgeon from Eastern Canada, a man named Dr. Stanley Vallant. And Dr. Vallant is a licensed practicing surgeon in contemporary Western medicine. He goes into hospitals, he works in operating rooms, he fixes people with a scalpel and sutures. But he is also an Indigenous spiritual man. And he had a vision while doing the Camino pilgrimage in Spain. He got an infection, he had a fever, he was sick, and he had this vision where he saw himself walking in the woods of his native Quebec, which is a province in Canada where he's from, walking with Indigenous youth and Indigenous elders as a sort of on a series of healing journeys. So after this vision, he came back to Canada and he started a series of long walks, 200, 300, 400 kilometers between Indigenous communities throughout Eastern Canada, with groups of up to 5, 6 dozen people joining him. So when the ideas that led to my book were kind of bouncing around in my brain, I managed to get Stanley, Dr. Vallant, on the phone and learned about what he was doing, why he was doing it, and he invited me to join one of his walks. So I ended up joining a winter walk, which was about, I think, 240 kilometers. We did over 3 weeks between a pair of communities, Indigenous communities in Quebec. And I had never done anything like that before. I've walked a lot. I've camped a lot. I've spent, as a Canadian, a fair bit of time outside skiing and playing hockey in the wintertime. But I've never spent 3 weeks outside moving from point to point in the wintertime with a group of people, with 5 dozen people. And we had sleds pulling our gear. We would set up camp each night in these canvas prospector tents, get some wood. There were small wood stoves inside for heat. We would all work together to set up camp, to take down camp, and talk to one another during the downtime. And although everybody in this walk, their first language was either French, which is one of the 2 official languages of Canada, and one that sadly I don't speak very well, or Atikamekw, which is the Indigenous group that a lot of people on this walk were from. So people spoke predominantly French or Atikamekw. There wasn't really very much English, which is my language. But my job there as a journalist and a storyteller was to talk to everybody, to understand who they were, to find out what motivated them. So I had to learn how to engage with them and to communicate with them. And over the course of 3 weeks, I went from feeling like an outsider to being worried that it would be challenging, not physically, but mentally and emotionally, to go through this process. But I really developed this incredible feeling of community and connection to everybody, which I think was reciprocated. And along the way, I learned not only from Stanley, but from the other people on this walk that, you know, it's a bit of a cliche, as many things associated with walking are, but it's eminently true that a long journey is daunting. Any sort of significant change in your life can be daunting, but if you approach it one step at a time, as an incremental change, as a series of steps, you can get from here to there. You can deal with the trauma or addiction or challenges in your life just the same way as you can get from this place to that place 250 kilometers in the wintertime. You're not going to do it in a day. It's not going to be easy. But if you approach it one step at a time and deal with each challenge as it arises, you can get there. And over the course of this walk, these ideas, which were largely abstract and philosophical in my mind, more theoretical, became very real. And I saw firsthand how much is possible if you approach things with this integrated, holistic mindset.
Wow. Well, that's really, really, really inspiring. And it's actually matches our experience, both that we can communicate with people from all over the world, and it's amazing when you do caminos or you meet these people on the walk. You don't speak the same language, but somehow we manage to communicate enough to get along, and as we are all, I would say, sharing the same objective, it's very easy usually. It doesn't take a lot of effort. But you were talking about this experience, really so interesting, that you were walking with indigenous people we know going through difficulties, social difficulties, and I would ask you if you see, or how do you see walking as a driver of social peace, of social connection, and maybe even a breaker of barriers?
Yeah, I mean, there's a proverb from an American Southwestern indigenous group. You know, you'll never know a man until you walk a mile in his moccasins, or something like that. And I think, again, verges on cliche, but infinitely true, that until you understand what somebody's life is like, what somebody is experiencing, the ability to relate to them and to see things from their perspective it's difficult. You know, you can never truly live in somebody else's shoes, but if you spend an hour, a day, a week, a month walking with them, you will have a much clearer picture of who they are and what their life is like than if you don't have that opportunity. So I think it's important. I mean, we live in an era of division. We live in an era of polarized politics, and despite the ability of technology, which is a very useful tool, we wouldn't be talking otherwise. Despite the ability of technology to connect us, it can often divide us, and it's often, you know, because of the way it flows down from giant multinational companies. A lot of it is monetized, and it's predicated on selling us things that we don't necessarily need, because that's its lifeblood is this commercial system. So walking, or any form of visceral, temporal connection to somebody else, helps us truly see one another as people and the natural world. And, you know, although we live in an urban society, 80% of the planet does, and we live inside boxes, and we drive cars and fly in airplanes, without those trees and that water and that air outside, we're not going to live much longer on this planet. So walking not only helps us connect to other people, but to these vital natural systems which we neglect and damage at our own peril.
Dan, thank you so much. You know, we've been talking about walking, and I think this is the right time usually in our podcast that we ask for a first music. And my guess for you is there any music you would like to share with us, maybe related with walking, and why?
Yeah, well, there's so many songs have walking imagery and walking metaphors, walking lyrics, and walk or walking in the title. I had a playlist of about 24 songs, in the lead up to my book that sort of took me to its release. But one of the seminal songs is called "One Day I'll Walk." It's by a Canadian artist named Bruce Cockburn, and it's about sort of, I think, like a lot of the things we've been talking about, it's searching for peace and wholeness and balance. That's, in my mind, what the narrator or protagonist of the song is moving towards. But the version I like, even though Bruce Cockburn is a well-known and very talented Canadian singer-songwriter, is a version of that song covered by a Canadian artist named Katie Lang, who has one of the most magnificent voices on the planet. So I would say "One Day I'll Walk," but not the original version. The Katie Lang cover version is one of my favorite songs.
So "One Day I Walk," let's listen to it. Dan, being a journalist and a storyteller, because by now we already understood that there is a storyteller running in your veins. Is there a particular story that maybe you want to tell us after, we've been already talking a little bit about walking, a little bit about the impact, experience, that maybe, shortly as a storyteller you can inspire us today?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many of the stories that are part of my book. I found incredibly inspiring, and the people I spent time with did such ambitious, lofty journeys, which embodied so many things. I mean, I spent a day with Rory Stewart, who's a member of Parliament in the UK. But prior to coming back home and entering politics, in the winter of 2002, he walked across about half of Afghanistan by himself, a British man, right after September 11th, when Afghanistan was a really dangerous place, and his journey, showed him just again that ability of walking to be a connecting force. He would show up, walking through storms and deep snow, and knock on the door of a mosque or walled community, and people would take him in and take care of him, even though he was seen as an interloper, as a potential spy, as a strange British man showing up in the middle of the night, in the middle of wintertime. So there's dramatic stories like that. I spent a few days in Philadelphia, in the state of Pennsylvania, where in a really high crime neighborhood. I think the neighborhood is about 2 square miles, and it averaged about 35, 36 murders a year. The police force turned to police officers walking in foot patrol as a way to address killings and violent crime. And it wasn't to have police out there to intervene and to stop crime. It was to have police officers get to know people in this community and have people get to know police officers. And when you engage with and interact with one another on foot at 4 kilometers an hour at this walking pace, you see one another as human beings, and you start to understand people at this really, really basic level, instead of police officers showing up in cars in the middle of a stressful situation and dealing with trauma in that way. But beyond what I wanted to get to is, so there were dramatic, really, really intense kind of narratives like that I tapped into. But one of the favorite experiences that I had reporting that book was spending some time in Glasgow, Scotland, which is a city which has its share of difficulties, poverty, violence, substance abuse, ill health. I think a lot of the health indicators in Glasgow put people there way beyond kind of the health measures for people throughout Western Europe and the UK. And one of the ways that public health authorities in Glasgow are trying to help make the city healthier is by having these free walking groups. So I joined a walking group organized by a local hospital one evening and went for a walk with 8 or 10 or 12 local people who, for various reasons, whether dealing with psychological issues or just trying to get physically healthier or to address the isolation and loneliness in their lives, wanted to join these groups. And just walking in a gray, rainy night with a bunch of strangers in an ordinary part of the city was such a wonderful experience. And by the end of that walk, I had been feeling kind of down and tired, and I'd been traveling for a few weeks, and I missed my family, and I was kind of at a low ebb of some of my travels. And that experience really buoyed me, and it showed me that even just a couple hours walking around a city with a group of strangers can do so many positive things.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, that really connects to your sentence in your book that you say that walking is a path to a better world, and I really do relate to that. I think and this is a perfect example, such a simple situation, and the benefits that were probably not even the target of such initiatives, but you still benefited from them. So that's really, really inspiring. Well, but now we realize that you're not only walking, but you're paddling. So do you want to tell us a little bit about that? So it's the similarities and differences, and what drives you there?
Yeah, I discovered stand-up paddleboarding about 4 years ago, and had started to see people doing it around, and it seemed kind of interesting. My wife made fun of it, but I said I'd give it a try, and instantly it it felt amazing, and it's like walking, but you're on water, and although there's all sorts of gear and techniques and different types of boards and different types of paddling and different types of water, whether it's a dynamic ocean, a flat water river, a lake. At its core, you're basically standing on a board or a piece of wood and using another board or another piece of wood to propel yourself. And to me, paddleboarding is essentially a way to connect with water and aquatic ecosystems in a really intimate way. And much as we've ignored or come inside and gotten away from the natural world, we've also turned our backs on water. And like walking, water is an essential part of who we are. I mean, we're born floating in utero in liquid. We are comprised largely of water. Our world is 2/3 water. Our communities are located where they are because we got there on water. We need water to drink, to irrigate our crops. It's so important for so many reasons, yet we take it for granted. We are dealing with droughts. We're dealing with polluted waters. We're dealing with the monetization and the sale of water, diversion of water for mining and oil development and those sorts of things. So as much as I love the personal feeling of being balanced on a board and negotiating waves or rapids or just flat water, and when you get into sort of a metronomic sequence of paddling, it's very meditative, and it almost becomes like a mantra. You can really lose yourself in your thoughts when you're paddling. But beyond that kind of physical or philosophical or psychological connection to paddling, it's about understanding the world of water and paying more attention to it and bringing it back to the forefront of our lives and thoughts. So that's what a lot of my paddling and writing about paddleboarding has led me to.
It's funny that you mentioned rapids. I would like to ask you something about rapids because, at the Walking Mentorship, we use walking and nature to support the mentoring process in our programs. But we found that you mentioned on your website something like, my office overlooks gorgeous set of rapids in Ottawa's Rideau River. So how much and actually in what ways do you believe these settings, I mean, these rapids, for instance, they actually work in your life if there is a connection? Can you share it with us?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I looked at those rapids for 2 or 3 years, and every spring here in Ottawa, when the snow melts, the river freezes in the winter, then the ice melts, and then all of the snow surrounding the drainage basin melts. And the river goes from a frozen sheet of ice to roaring rapids with high water. So I watched this pattern for a couple of springs. This is beautiful, but it's way too dangerous and scary and big and loud. But after a couple of years, I thought, no, I'm ready to hop on my board and paddle through there, and it was amazing. And it's very I think sort of dynamic, natural features like that. Whenever I'm in ocean waves surfing or on rapids on my board, I'm a little bit scared and intimidated, and that's very humbling, and that provides kind of the perspective and balance and shows me that I am just this small speck in this big, powerful world. And that although it's in a sense diminutizes you, it's also very empowering because it gives you perspective to understand who you are and as one of 7 billion, what your real role and purpose is. And you can find that same I think perspective in any natural space, whether it's a trail in the woods, a lake, even a bit of green space in a city. I mean, it's watching birds outside your window. It's going on a hike. It's all of those things. So I think having access to and spending time in those natural places is certainly essential for me, and I think obviously for so many people as well.
Well, thank you so much. You definitely persuaded me to start paddleboarding. I will try it for sure. I've been thinking about it for a while, but I'm going to try it for sure. You gave me...
One of the most amazing things about it is, I mean, you're on a board, you have a leash, you're attached to the board. The worst thing that can happen is you fall in, and then you're in the water for a while, and then you climb back on. The risk is, as long as you have proper safety gear and know where you are and what you're doing and stay within your limits, it's a very easy way to immerse yourself in an environment that we often don't spend time in. And there's this idea that, this is dangerous, you need to stay away from it. So it's kind of legislation as opposed to education. And we have rivers and lakes and oceans and waterways in all of our cities and all of our towns, but we often don't spend time on them or in them because they're dangerous or scary or polluted or cold, when in fact on a board or other forms of waterborne travel, you can be on them and in them. And then you develop this more intimate connection to them, which could lead to a feeling of stewardship and protection and conservation. So rather than fear the ocean or the river, get to know it, get to spend time on it in a safe way, and that's when I think you're going to want to protect it and love it and care for it and see that it remains a healthy place.
I love the description. Actually, I was thinking, it sounds like life, and the leash maybe some kind of a purpose to keep you, from going away from your board.
But I totally agree. I think this fear that actually it's not the fear, because as you mentioned, fear is healthy. It serves to protect us. But the fact that we do not accept that we should face our fear to a degree that is reasonable, and it's you had to prepare yourself to do the rapid. You could not do it like just jump there. So, but if you measure the amount of danger you put yourself into, and if you learn to cope with your fear and not see nature as something outside of us that's dangerous, but actually something we're part of, which involves danger, but we are probably the most dangerous of all. So if we learn to deal with that, it's probably much easier to take care of our environment. And I totally agree with you that it's the best way to get people, and especially children, to respect environment and to do their best, not from a high standing point saying amazing things about the environment, but actually interacting with it and connecting with it and being part of the environment, and realizing by that way that it's all about us. It's even if you don't care for anyone else, you should care at least for yourself, and I believe you should care for others, obviously. But if you just look at yourself and you see you're part of that system, then you cannot be irresponsible or not care for your environment. But thank you so much for this inspiration. Well, and now it's time. Sorry, go ahead.
Obviously, the best way to develop a connection to something is to understand it, to know it, is to love it, is to want to protect it, and whether that's surfing a giant wave off the coast of Portugal or going for a walk, a 5-kilometer walk. Some people might think, I can't manage that distance, I'll never make it. And you try, and with the right preparation, with the right teaching and mentorship and support, I'm lucky that I've had many great instructors who've taught me how to paddle and paddle safely and understand my limits. So within the right context, you can do anything. You just need to approach an incremental, learned way. And there's nothing you can't do as long as you approach it in that wise way.
At least you can move in the right direction.
Exactly.
Even if you take a while to reach your destiny. Well, and now I would set the challenge for another music. What would you suggest us?
Yeah, my second song is a bit harder edge than the first. It's called "Walk With Me." It's by a Canadian and internationally really well-known rock musician named Neil Young, and it's got loud, crunchy electric guitar, and it's really just a call by the artist, by the protagonist in this song, to join him on a journey from the very first chord and the very first lyric, which simply says, "Walk with me."
Wow, sounds like we're gonna ride the rapids with Neil Young. Let's do it.
So this is a kind of a trick question. If you had no constraints at all, which adventure would you embark today?
If you could go on a plane.
You know what? That's a very good question. For some of the reasons we've been talking about, I'm really obsessed with surfing right now. It's something that I've come to later in life, in my mid 40s. I grew up in the middle of the continent, nowhere near the ocean, so it's a steep learning curve. So I love surfing, and I guess getting on a plane and going to some tropical island with great waves and warm water would be nice. But I also like simple things, and I always like getting places under my own steam. And an idea that really appeals to me, although I don't have the time or the gear or the capability right now, I'd love to literally walk out my door with my inflatable paddleboard on my back, walk to the Rideau River, inflate my board, paddle to the Ottawa River, paddle along that river to the St. Lawrence River, paddle along that river to the Atlantic Ocean, and surf there. And that journey would take take a month or two, perhaps. It's a couple thousand kilometers, but I love the idea of leaving your home under your own steam and getting somewhere in that slow, simple way. And I would love to do a journey like that, where I walk out my door and end up months later in a completely different part of the world, just traveling under my own, my arms and legs at this point.
Wow, it's really amazing, because I'm listening to you. Then I'm thinking that just, a few minutes ago you mentioned about the Camino de Santiago from one of the stories that you mentioned. And quite often during these modern days, people believe that they go, to a certain point in Spain or France, and then they start their Camino de Santiago. And actually, the real Camino de Santiago that we know for almost 1,000 years starts at your door. Actually, that's the real route. You open the door, you go to Santiago, and then you come back home. And that's actually the route. And I was listening to you and thinking that really reminds me of a water pilgrim. I don't know how to call it, but that's how I saw it.
It's fun. A couple of years ago, I was being interviewed about walking, and somebody asked. It was a group session where multiple people were asking questions, and somebody asked, "What's your favorite walk?" And I said, "My favorite walk is from where I am to where I need to go, and wherever I happen to be." I love just finding a route, picking a route, and making that journey. And it just so happened that at the end of that interview, I was in Toronto, which is where I'm from, but I haven't lived there for 20 years, in a part of the city I wasn't really familiar with. And I was heading to a friend's house that evening, and I left this office studio and walked for 2 or 3 hours, a route I had never taken, to get to my friend's house. And it was a really beautiful walk, in which I saw and experienced things I never had in the city that I'm from. And so I just had this idea in my head that my favorite walk it just happens to be where I need to go. But then 2 hours later, I lived that. So, yeah, I love that idea of traversing an ordinary landscape and just finding what you find along the way. It reminds me of one of the people in my book is a guy named Matt Green, who walked across the United States, and subsequent to that started a project where he's walking every block of every street in New York City. But when he was planning his walk across the U.S., people kept saying, "Oh, you need to go here, you need to go there, you need to stop here, you need to see that." And as a rejection of a prescribed route and anticipating certain landmarks and stops along the way, he just said, "I'm starting here and I'm ending there, and I'm just going to figure it along the way." And that allowed him to truly experience the journey and experience things that he would not have seen had he mapped out a planned route. So that serendipity is one of the beautiful things of walking. It's just, I'm going from here to there, and we'll figure it out along the way.
Then, tell us, how do you see the world 10 years from now? So let's time travel to 2030. What do you see there?
I'm an optimist, and I would say that despite a lot of the serious challenges we're facing, including obviously climate change, but also the global pandemic, polarized politics, violence, global sort of military dictatorships. I think we have the capacity as a society, as a series of societies, to grow and learn and change. And I think that, we're still going to be mired in a lot of worrisome, challenging times, but we're perhaps beginning to round the corner, and we might see that the destination is a little bit more visible. And I'm seeing things, in the energy sector, in which insurance companies and energy companies are starting to pull back on destructive oil developments because it's no longer viable or sustainable, either environmentally or financially. We're seeing things in the context of COVID-19 a lot here in North America and Europe as well, in which cities are taking space away from cars on streets and making safe space for pedestrians and cyclists and restaurants and patios. And these changes in cities happen really quickly, despite decades of resistance, in car-centric cultures to any sorts of changes like that. So if we can do these things really quickly and they work, perhaps some of them will stick. And in 10 years, we won't be out of the woods yet, so to speak, but perhaps we will have another decade of evidence that we can successfully develop safe, clean forms of energy. We can transform the spaces in our cities in which 80% of the planet lives into more sustainable social spaces. That some of the creeping reach of giant tech companies and their invasion of privacy and their monetization of our data, they'll be pushed back against that. So, we have to remain wary and vigilant, and it's certainly going to be an uphill struggle and fight for years and years and years. I'm optimistic and hopeful that in 10 years, we're going to see some of the benefits of these types of resistance and some of the positive possibilities that will be a little bit closer than they are now, perhaps.
I'm with you on that.
Totally agree. And as you said before, even if it seems that walking is slow, if you keep moving in the right direction, you definitely do a lot of change. So if you look at change, in what would you like to focus your energy in the coming time? In what would you focus your energy, your action into improving the world, even if it's just a little bit? What would be your choice?
Yeah, I mean, and I think one of the ways in which we see the possibilities of change through walking and other forms of movement is that idea of a shifting perspective. And when you're stationary and static, it's easier to see things in one way. But when you're moving, when you're walking, your senses are bombarded by all sorts of dynamic stimuli. And as psychologists and researchers have kind of theorized and studied, it's the interaction of this dynamic shifting perspective with the thoughts and ideas already inside your brain that leads to creative leaps and new ways of seeing and new ways of understanding. So I think that sort of movement is key, and it's certainly going to be a big part of what I doing going forward. I hate to keep bringing it back to paddling, but that's where a lot of my energy is going these days, and a lot of my writing, and I have trips and reporting projects and a book in mind, and hopefully some of these bigger lofty goals will come to fruition, and my work as a paddle writer will lead me to a few places over the next 10 years. And even if none of the stories pan out or none of the bigger projects pan out, I will have the luxury and benefit of spending as much time as possible on the water, which is a very calming, grounding, peaceful, balanced place for me to be. And even in the early days of the lockdown back in March, I was out on the river as much as possible, and it felt like such an escape and such a journey. And I would come back home and come back to the city and come back to the reality after an hour or two or three or four, and felt like I had gone on this tremendous journey and had this newfound sense of energy and peace and motivation. So I want to and need to keep doing that in the months and years ahead.
I hope you do, because for sure it will be a good movement for sure. So do you want to share another music with us?
Yeah, my third song isn't as directly related to walking as the first two, I would say. It's a song called Canaan by a group called Black Dub, which is led by another Canadian artist named Daniel Lanois, who's most known as a producer for producing big albums by U2 and Bob Dylan and bands such as that. And this song, it's really, to me, it's about a journey through a cityscape on foot and all of the sights and sounds and people that the narrator sees and engages with. And it's a journey in the song Canaan towards sort of a heavenly place. And it's about connection and oneness with all of the people in the city and the society in which he's singing. So yeah, Canaan by Black Dub would be my third musical selection.
Great, let's listen to it.
Well, Daniel, thank you so much for this incredible talk we had with you. I mean, I'm still digesting some of the stories that you share with us. I mean, they're so inspiring. They really help us to see in many different directions, and life becomes so much more interesting. We do have one last challenge for you, and this is a classic. So this is a question we want to repeat in every podcast. And I think you will understand why, because this might be useful for some people in the future. So we're going to give you kind of a time capsule, and we would like you to put inside whatever you want, but just imagine that after you close your message, we're going to shoot this into the universe. So we never know, maybe a year from now, maybe 1,000 years from now, someone is going to open that time capsule. You know, by you, done by you, and what they will find inside this time capsule this time is now for you to fill it in, whatever you want.
That's a really good question. I think the three songs I selected would share the message and continue the journey very nicely. So, you know, that music, I would include that. I would include some sort of footwear, a boot or a sandal or a flip-flop, to signify the importance of putting something on your feet, or walking barefoot, I guess, and getting out there and moving, and maybe a paddle. Maybe, you know, although paddleboard paddles are very large, maybe a miniaturized version of one, just to show the importance of being on the water and engaging with the world in that way.
Wow.
Great.
Wow. Dan, thank you so much for being with us today, and we really hope that some of the images that you share with us, especially the ones related with the future, step by step they become a reality for all of us.
Thank you both very much. I really enjoyed our chat, and I love the work you're doing, and I wish you the best of continued success with this podcast and your walking mentorship program as a whole.
Thank you so much. You too.
You
best successes, and thank you so much, Dan, and let's keep walking.
Let's keep walking.
Indeed.